Hi, everyone. It's really an honor to be here and to see all these attendees who are, many of them, ongoing contributors to the Center for Grateful Leadership. And if you're not yet, but you want to be, we always have room for you and your ideas for how to promote gratitude, appreciation, and acknowledgement in the workplace and in life in general. And I don't know if you've been noticing, but more and more people are focusing on gratitude as a way of getting through this crisis. And, I always say, we've been doing it all the time. Well, not all the time, but we've been practicing it all the time. And now everybody's starting to get on board with it because it's one of the few actual tools that we have to make ourselves feel better. It distracts us from the negative, and we focus on the positive and all the gratefulness that's in us. And it really does make a difference. There have been more and more studies about that. Anyway, today I am very happy and excited to introduce our guest speakers, Betty and Michael Friedlander. I met Betty quite a few years ago at a Rockland County, New York Women's Business Networking group, and we just kept discovering connection after connection. And actually, we had both done this masculine and feminine dynamics work with the relationship expert Allison Armstrong. They did it before I did, Betty and Michael did. But it's very impactful work and really makes you think about a lot of things. Betty and Michael started teaching it, and then that led to their forming a delightful company called Blissfully Married. And if you go to their website, which Roxy put in the text chat, you'll see lots of videos and papers that will help you not only in your work life, but in your personal relationships too. So Betty and Michael, I wanted to say those kind words about you, but I know you're going to prove how great your concepts are and your delivery is. So let's go ahead with bridging the gender gap with grateful leadership. And before I turn it over, I do want to say people have shared with me over the course of my program deliveries, well, women are afraid to look too soft. They're afraid to acknowledge in the workplace full-heartedly. And I'd like you to say a few words about that. It's not true for everyone, but it is something that we hear a lot. So take it, Betty and Michael. And this is more of a conversation than a presentation. So I look forward to it.
Thank you, Judy. Thank you. Okay, so I just want to say a little bit more about how Michael and I got involved with this work. The woman, her name is Allison Armstrong. Her company is PAX Programs. The website is understandmen.com. But really for me, it began in 1999 when Michael proposed to me in Paris. It was very romantic. And my best friend Karen said, don't marry him. It's not going to work. And I knew what she meant because I was about to become wife number 4, which was a big concern for me. I'm like, how am I going to make this work? So it was with that in mind when in 2001, we'd been married about a year, I heard about this workshop that was all about understanding men. And I was 41 at the time, and I thought, I think I understand men, but but it was with what Karen had said that I said, okay, I'm going to give this a try. And it was a weekend workshop. It was called Celebrating Men, Satisfying Women. And I will tell you, I thought my marriage was good, but it really completely transformed our marriage, what I learned that weekend. And Mike and I were so excited about it. I kept taking all the workshops. When she started including men, Michael took all the workshops. And when she began training workshop leaders, we were right in. So we trained to lead her workshop. We led it for years, and then we created Blissfully Married. We're teaching that information, but as it applies to marriage. Now, for this presentation, we're going to be applying it to the workplace because I know that's what Grateful Leadership is all about. But Michael, is there anything you want to add to that?
The way I was left in most of my relationship was there's something wrong with me and I'm broken. And I was not able to be responsive in the way my female companions needed and desired. And I always thought, okay, I need to do more work and go back to therapy to see if I can connect more with my feminine side. And then what I learned was, okay, we have different ways of behaving, and the masculine behaves a certain way and the feminine behaves a certain way by our nature. And when we're in relationships, it can be difficult, and Betty has made our marriage work by her, both of our doing this studying with Allison and being able to accommodate what each of us need.
Yes, that's exactly right. I mean, for me, it's about how do I bring out the best in Michael and avoid bringing out the worst. And it doesn't, I use this information every day, and I'm not always successful, but I know exactly when I've done something wrong. I get an instant response, and it's like, oh, okay, I interrupted, or I did whatever it is that brings out the worst. And I'm able to own it, correct it, and move on, and not take things personally. Okay, so I want to start with the duality of being human, because as human beings, it could be said that there's like two pieces. There's the human-animal aspect, which is all about instinct, and then there's human spirit. So let's start with human-animal, because I know we like to think that we've evolved beyond there is no instinct and that we're all just making choices day in and day out, but really underneath there's this instinctive behavior that runs us. And it could be said that human-animal exists for the purpose of human-animal is for the survival of the species. Human spirit, which we'll get to, is more about quality of life. And there's even been a lot of brain studies. There's, the limbic part versus our prefrontal cortex, which is all about our decision making. So let's start with instinct. The definition of instinct: a primal biological urge impelling a response which brings a release of tension. So the first thing you want to know is that it's biological. It can't be cured with therapy, right? So there's nothing wrong. We all have it. It's kind of hardwired. It's run by hormones, and it gets activated when we perceive a threat. And how you know it's been activated is when you feel tense, which is not infrequent, right? We feel tense a lot, and the response is a fight or flight, flight or freeze response. That's a real tongue twister. Fight, flight, or freeze. And yeah, so it's there when you feel tense, and what you experience is you experience fear or scarcity, competition, or glee. Glee is like, got him, got her, I'm getting what I want, right? That's glee. Why am I talking about human-animal is because when we're talking about survival, the workplace, since it's all about producing results and survival, is steeped in human-animal, and it's inherently a masculine paradigm. The masculine is about producing results. So we're going to be looking at the 5 C's of of grateful leaderships, right, of the power of acknowledgement through the lens of human animal and human spirit. So, okay, let's talk a little bit about human spirit. Human spirit shows up when we feel safe, and what makes men feel safe and what makes women feel safe are completely different. Now, most women, when they're in the workplace, they are hunters, right? If you think about the hunter-gatherer societies, they're out to produce results. They're in their masculine. And what makes the masculine feel respected is trust and respect. That's when he feels safe, when he's able to produce results. What makes the feminine feel safe is when they feel a connection, when they feel that connection. And very often that doesn't happen in the workplace. What I want to say about the power of acknowledgement is that it is absolutely an expression of human spirit. But Michael, I want to know if you have anything to add to what I'm saying, or have I said it all?
No, I think you pretty well covered it.
Okay. All right. So then let's move on to the 5 C's of acknowledgement. Consciousness, choice, courage, communication, and commitment. So let's look at it through the lens of human animal, human spirit. Number 1, consciousness. Okay, so in order to be conscious, there needs to be a pause. And I would say one of the biggest things that could get in the way of consciousness is not pausing. There's something masculine called single focus. Maybe you've heard men can only do one thing at a time. They're single focused on producing results. Think of a hunter, right? Actually, Michael, I'd love for you to talk about this one, because yeah.
So when we're heads down and we're doing our work and we're really involved in a specific task or project, and our brain cycles are all focused on that one thing, single focused, to pull ourselves out of that and be responsive to another input, meaning someone else needs something, can be upsetting. And for men, a lot of the men that I have worked with and the men I know in my life and for myself, when I'm really involved in something and I'm thinking 100% about that, any kind of interruption is distressing, and it pulls me away. And one of the problems is that it takes a while to get back to what you were doing. And so the response that you may get is not the response that you might want if you interrupt a single-focused man. Learning to take a breath before you issue a response, what do you need now? is something that we gain. And I know that everyone on this call has undoubtedly done a lot of work. So we all are more conscious of our interactions with people. But the society at large, probably more than we would like, operates in the context of human spirit, in human animal. So we are more apt to respond instinctively to negative impulses. Anyway, when we can take a breath and take a pause and think about, okay, let me pull myself out of this, the task that I'm working on, let me look up from my desk, let me smile at the person who just walked into my cube or hovered over the divider because none of us have offices anymore. Let me see what they want, and I will just respond in a gracious, accommodating way rather than you interrupted me and let me get back to my work as quickly as possible.
Yeah, but there's also the consciousness in the power of acknowledgement is you want to be focused on the results you want to do is to notice people, be conscious and notice that there is an acknowledgement to be said. And I almost feel like there's reminders because you could be so easily be distracted by everything, all the results that need to be produced. So Maybe like a physical reminder could help you be conscious of that. Okay, so number 2, the choice. Human spirit is all about choice. So when you're in human animal, there is no choice. And very often at work, it can be stressful, and you get sucked into that. Again, taking a breath, being conscious is really huge in making that choice. 3 is courage. I love this one because I thought about, well, why would it be an act of courage? Judy, you had mentioned something about for women, they don't want to appear soft. You know, it's almost like women in the workplace, we want to behave like a man, but you know, we're wired like a woman, which is really difficult. But there's another instinctive behavior that's part of human animal, and it has to do with the way men, the masculine, I don't want to say men because women have masculine too, it's that the masculine conceals. It's an automatic way of being, and it comes from the idea that of protection. It's a form of protecting themselves. So it's a huge victory of it's a victory of human spirit to override that instinct. And Michael, I'd love to hear more from you about that.
Yeah, so the masculine is about protection, and we have a warrior side. And the warrior conceals their weaknesses and their strengths and their associations because they can be used against us. And when you think about the man or the masculine in the workplace not wanting to reveal the fact that you may have been wrong about something, and to issue an acknowledgement of someone whose idea was better than yours, that can take some courage. Mm-hmm. It can also be courageous to say to someone, that was a really great performance, and not judge yourself as being diminished by that. By putting someone else, raising someone else does not diminish you. I worked in a jewelry manufacturing company for 13 years, and it was a company that my father worked at for many, many decades. And I started working there, and what I noticed was there was no appreciation of talent or acknowledgement of good work. And when I questioned one of the owners, and it was owned by 5 men, they said, never let them know, because they'll use it to get a raise, or they'll go somewhere else, or they'll use it against us. And it was not an easy place to work because people were not appreciated for what they brought. They didn't feel valued. And I think part of it was there was no courage to allow others to feel good about themselves. It was always, they're going to use it against me. And that's why it may be hard for some people to issue those acknowledgments.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And again, for women especially, when we're in the masculine, I do agree that there are a lot of women that want to look strong, and it looks soft to do that. They don't want to be considered all fluffy. Like there's that, so being considered feminine when you're in a leadership role is not, unfortunately, that's not a complimentary. Okay, so let's move on to communication, because from what I've learned over the years and what I've learned from Allison is, how you communicate matters. So if you've ever read the book, The 5 Love Languages, which is written by Gary Chapman, he asserts that people experience love through different acts. So, for instance, there's acts of service, there's words of affirmation, there's touch, there's quality times, and there's time, and there's gifts. So these are the 5 love languages, according to Gary Chapman. Well, I will assert that it's really the same way with appreciation and acknowledgement. Because if you're really going to go through the trouble of acknowledging someone, you want to make sure that it actually resonates with them. Because when you go through the trouble, you don't want it to fall flat. You want it to really resonate. And from what we've seen, the masculine usually likes to be shown, like acts of service. I know is Michael's. He makes him feel loved, but it also makes him feel appreciated. That would be his. For many women, it's words of affirmation. So you could look at, actually, I'd love, Michael, for you to say more about that. I know you gave an example of the military and how they express appreciation.
There's a reason why military services have medals that they pin on chests and ribbons that you wear on your uniform. And there are some ceremonies for presentation. And those are ancient rituals. And they're part of what ties into the instinctive behavior, but also those rituals raise us into the human spirit as well. For thousands of years, armies and military units have been recognizing heroism and achievement with swords and shields, and then the medals that they transformed into that we pinned on men's chests, men and women now, but primarily, these ceremonies were created by men. This is a demonstration of an acknowledgement, and so words alone may not always be enough for a man. It may need to be more than that. And the other thing I wanted to say about, being the communication, if it doesn't land with the person, as Betty said, then it's not what you intended. So you may not take it as an acknowledgement or appreciation if it wasn't communicated in the right way. Another thing we need to be conscious of is people who are introverted may not want to have a public ceremony. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of people who don't call me out in public. I appreciate what you say about me, but do it in private, not in public. And then there are others who really want that public ceremony, and they want to be recognized in front of her group. Look how great Sally did this month, and the client that she landed.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. I think the key takeaway from that is just getting to know the person you're speaking to and what resonates with them, and noticing. I mean, for some people, they feel acknowledged. A promotion will make them feel acknowledged. Public praise. For some people, there's more money, or it's even being heard. Asking them for their ideas and what do they think about that. That could actually be a form of acknowledgement for many people. Okay, and the last thing, I thought this was interesting that this was number 5, commitment, because I almost feel like you need to start with the commitment, right? The commitment, and everything else flows from there. I mean, it takes a huge commitment to really take this on. And if you think about it, the perfect incentive is that appreciation actually is the fuel that motivates people. It brings out the best in people, no matter what the relationship, whether it's at marriage or at work. So that's a really great reason to take it on. Anything you want to add to that, Michael?
Well, committing yourself to be aware is, I think, the number one thing. Right. And there are instances all around us where we can be aware. And one of the practices that many people recommend is at the end of the day, journal what you're grateful for about that particular day, the people and the things that happened that day that you can be grateful for. And if you become more aware of that and more committed to communicating your appreciation of, everybody around you, the way the groceries were packed and the smile that you received, or someone taking notice and making sure they bought milk so you didn't run out. All of those things, it takes a commitment to be conscious and a choice and courage to communicate in the way they will land, to be gratefully acknowledging all the things that happen around us.
Well spoken. Thank you, Michael. And with that, this is the time when we'll take questions.
Betty and Michael, I just want to thank you for that very, very insightful presentation. And I kind of wish I had you in my back pocket every time I teach a course or deliver a keynote address, because gender issues do come up. And I think what you brought to the table today is just extra fuel for the message of appreciation, acknowledgement, and gratitude. And we love every resource we can find to breaking the barriers. And I just want to say two quick things in response, and then I'm going to let everyone else talk. Well, not everyone, we don't have time for that, but a few people. Michael, what you said about the military was so interesting to me, because I was brought into the U.S. Army at West Point to train military leaders some years back. And when I left that session, it was a day-long and night-long session. They made me do a session for the spouses of the military that evening. I thought I was going to pass out, but it was an amazing, one of the real most profound experiences of my career. And I had people who were all being deployed within the next 3 months in that group. And they said they were going to take the power of acknowledgement with them to the battlefield. Like, they had never heard anything like that before. And Chaplain Primitivo Davis has been with us for years now, and he says he incorporates the power of acknowledgement to all of his teachings, and he's in charge of teaching in Germany right now, in the U.S. Army. So, you know, it goes, yes, they need it now, the medals and the ribbons and the buttons and the bows, but what they really are desperately lacking is the power of acknowledgement in the military. That's my take on it. And just one other thing I wanted to say about commitment. When I think you made some really great points about it, both of you. And when I speak of commitment, I'm talking more on the corporate level. How do we bring this into a corporation and have it spread, take root, and grow to a point where the company says, we must have this? And I know Michelle Millette, who's here from Volvo, she's been trying for years to get it to really take root, and she's a certified Grateful Leadership instructor. She's taught this to many, many, many employees there. So that's the real challenge for us, and I welcome any thoughts about that as we go on. But I don't know if you want to respond to anything, or we just take some more questions.
Well, certainly your reference to the military, Judy, not every, there's something about doing your job, you're doing your job and you do it well, and that's what's expected, and you don't expect praise for that. And part of being in an organization that's structured the way the military is that you're not going to get a medal for everything that you do, but you could certainly be acknowledged. You could certainly be acknowledged for within a small unit for doing well. And what you're bringing, Judy, with the power of acknowledgement is on those day-to-day transactions and the day-to-day things that everyone does, they can be recognized. And not, again, you don't need to pin something on somebody's chest to recognize good work.
Very good point. Okay, so who else has questions for these gender experts who really have, I'd say you have really mastered grateful leadership and the power of acknowledgement in its essence, and I can see that through this presentation. I'm very very grateful to you for having absorbed so much.
Thank you, Judy.
Susan, why don't you go ahead with?
I'm sorry, did you say me, Roxy? Okay. So I think this is great. I have some challenges with it. I feel like I'm an engineer by education, and I heard you say a few times, well, women feel like they have to be this way or that way. I actually just am inherently, I guess, a hunter in the workplace, and my husband has called me out on it. Like if I work from home, I've always worked, or not always, in the last 10 years, I've mostly worked from home, and I will come out of my office and my husband's like, I don't like that person, because it's like, I'm very like direct to the point, not, like the example that Michael gave where it was like, you interrupted me. Like I've found myself reacting that way because I'm so focused when I'm working. And so for me, even in my work, I found I had to be very intentional to be compassionate. And I am compassionate, but it's like I forget about it because I'm so focused on what I'm doing. And I say to Judy, I'm very left-brained, but she says, well, you're right-brained too. And I do believe I'm both, but anytime I hear gender stuff, it's always like when I've done, listen to things, I'm like, I get how the guys like being. I understand that, like that works for me, and I don't understand often the woman's side, but I'm a woman, so like that's very odd to me, and it's not because I'm being like that in the workplace. I think I actually am like that, and that's challenging in a relationship. Like I get that that's challenging for my husband. So how do you address that? I mean, I don't think we're all women are like this and all men are like that.
That's so great because so many women are dealing with exactly that. Well, first of all, women hunt. When I talk about masculine and feminine, it isn't really men and women. When we're at work, whereas we hunt as much as men do. So that's very common, and where it doesn't work to be masculine necessarily is in your romantic relationships. So so the key is finding a transitioning back into the feminine, because you're really in a romantic relationship. I mean, I've seen romantic relationships where, he's the more feminine one and she's the more masculine. It can work, but it really works better. You want to bring out the masculine in him, and the only way to do that is to transition into your feminine when you're with him. And sometimes that takes a ritual, right? Because you're single focus. Like men need to transition when they get home too from work, and they need transition time. And
well,
so, yeah.
Definitely a guy. But I will say he does landscaping, and he's very, very creative. So he has some qualities that, creativity, and to me, people in landscaping are outdoor artists. And I'm very clear, like, we're decorating things around the house. He's better at that than I am, but he's definitely a guy. So it's interesting that, we each have qualities we contribute to the other. So
yes, and we need to recognize that no one is 100% of one or the other. It runs along the bell curve. So we're all a mix of masculine and feminine. And I have feminine traits and Betty has masculine traits just by our nature without being placed into a specific environment. So nobody's broken and nobody's wrong. It's the mix of the qualities that we have.
Yeah, and in the relationships that are working, there's a complementary. They complement each other. They're always in conflict. Like if you're both trying to be masculine and at the same time, there's probably going to be a lot of conflict. And it's like your husband said, I don't like it when you're like that.
Yeah.
That's really, yeah.
And so one thing we do teach in our workshop is having rituals to remove yourself from all the detritus of the workplace and being in that hunter mode, and put yourself back into more open and accepting and nature, more feminine nature. So this is especially for women, so they can be more responsive to what their masculine partner needs from them. The masculine doesn't want a competitor in the bedroom. They want, right, or in the household, they want a complementary nature in their partner.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's great. You guys are awesome, and I'm not going to talk anymore, even though I'd love to, because I know there's some other great things for people to say. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Susan. And Michael, I was just wondering if you could give us an example of this kind of ritual that you're referring to and advocating.
Sure. So both men and women can have transitions. Men transition by doing various things, but so, you know, reading a book or listening to music in a quiet space, or coming home after a harrowing, you know, when we actually get to go to work after a harrowing day, or even closing the door on our work-at-home offices and then go into a different room and take on a different activity that could be pleasurable. That could, for the masculine, I know those are typical kinds of activities. And Betty can talk to transition rituals for women.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it depends on how much time you have, right? But sometimes it's just freshening up, fixing your hair, maybe fix your makeup, putting on something that makes you feel sexy. If you have time, you know, take a bubble bath. There's all kinds of things you can do to feel beautiful and feel feminine. And some of them can take, you know, a few minutes, and some of them can take a little longer, depending on how much time you have to do that. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you. And we could have a whole session just on these rituals. I think this is very valuable. Maybe you want to write a piece for us about that.
Actually, I think that the rituals that we have right now. Hi, Betty. Hi, Michael. I'm Jim Trella, project manager for General Motors. And those rituals that you're talking about are very interesting, because as you talked about it, and I had to transition from an office worker to a work-at-home worker, and you could see that hunter come out anytime somebody opened the door of my office at home, and my wife poked her head in, or one of my children. When I talk about my wife, you know, we're still newlyweds. We've only been married for 32 years. And it's that commitment. I'm kind of blending this all together. It's the commitment that's given us that long, and it's the commitment that let me sit there, stop, and every time she came in, or one of my children came in and interrupted, and I went back and examined it, and my wife looked at me and said, "You did it again." And I just had to say, okay, there has to be something that I can do. And I've started to, you know, a lot of times it's truly just a deep breath. That is the beginning of the ritual, so that I don't bite somebody's head off. Somebody actually told me I used to do that at work when I got interrupted. And that didn't help my career very well. But I wanted to really say that a lot of times I used to use my drive home from the office as that ritual to start to decompress, as I would say, and then move forward with being husband and dad versus being employee. And so I understand. You hit so many notes during this entire presentation that I could just keep going for a while. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much, Jim, for sharing that.
We would love to go on.
Great.
One of the things we teach the women in our workshop is you have to interrupt sometimes, but the key is being good at interrupting. You say, "I'm sorry to interrupt," and that just gives him a moment. Okay, she's showing respect, and he can say, "Okay, that's fine," or he could say, "Not now," and she'll know to okay, back off. Not a good time, but just knowing that you're interrupting is is huge. And it's the same thing with interrupting a woman when she's hunting. You know, if somebody's saying, I'm sorry to interrupt, this is a good time, makes all the difference in the world. That's how you bring it to human spirit, as opposed to that human animal reaction.
We use a knock on the door. When I'm in the middle of something, a knock on the door says, "Can I come in?" And usually it will be, "Come in," or "Wait a few minutes," or something like that. But that knock on the door is exactly what you said. It's the, I'm interrupting and I recognize it. So I know there are other people want to talk. I could keep going on forever, as Judy knows. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we all could. This is just a wonderful topic. And I'm going to say respectfully that we have to move on, Betty and Michael, but we're very grateful that you were here today. Thank you so much. It was wonderful to have you, and we hope you'll stay for the rest of the podcast because we still have some amazing things. And one of those I'm going to go to first is, you may notice a little change in this logo here. But I got notification, I think it was 2 weeks ago, from Jim Trella that he had reached his 3rd anniversary of doing a podcast every single week, every Monday morning. Some of our members, probably many of our members, started their Mondays with Jim Trella and a cup of coffee. And it was just an outstanding series of podcasts that he and I got into great heated discussions on sometimes, and sometimes I would just say this is wonderful because I would always review the podcast before. And Jim notified me that he's ready and in need of taking a hiatus and needed to step down. So it was a momentary panic time because he's carved out such a wonderful spot for the Art of Grateful Leadership podcast, which is his title, and I'm so grateful to him for everything that he's done. And I was a little bit in shock, I have to say, but then we talked about it, and I realized that this was such a brand within a brand that we had to keep it going. And so we want to play just a couple of minutes of Jim's last podcast for the time being. As he called it, it's his last scheduled podcast. But he always has an open door to come in and say, hey, something I would like to talk about today. And the door is wide open, Jim. And I never realized how much work it was to do a podcast, I have to admit. I did my first 2 last week, and one of them aired. I don't know if anybody has heard it, but it was really a tribute to Jim Trella. So we're going to play a segment from his last podcast, and then we'll just close out for the time being and know, Jim, that you're loved and appreciated, and you always have a place.
We are entering into May now and have just passed the 3rd anniversary of the podcast. That's right, in April of 2017, the Art of Grateful Leadership was launched, and we have had over 14,000 downloads. First of all, I want to say thank you to all the loyal listeners that have been with me through all 3 years, or even just part of it. Since the beginning of the podcast, we have tried to give people tools and techniques for acknowledging another person. We've given you interviews with people that are practicing grateful leadership no matter what their role in the company is. And most of all, we have provided examples of the simplicity behind acknowledgement. Those stories of communicating heartfelt acknowledgement to another person. The goal of the podcast is to let people know that we are all moving in the same direction. We all face the same challenges, and we want to support all who are on our grateful leadership journey. If we've made the difference in anyone's life, in anyone's acknowledgement journey, then we have been truly successful. I would like to thank the support team that has been behind the Art of Grateful Leadership podcast from the beginning. These are the people providing their time, ideas, and talents to the Art of Grateful Leadership podcast. The largest group are those belonging to the Center for Grateful Leadership. The members have provided the backing and, most importantly, the support. Thank you. There are just too many people to mention all of you here during this episode, please accept my heartfelt thanks. I would like to take some time to acknowledge two particular people. The first is Roxy Nevin. Roxy has been the technical support person since the beginning. Her knowledge is unparalleled, and the amazing way she searches and finds the right answers is invaluable. Thank you, Roxy, for all you've done for the Art of Grateful Leadership podcast. Finally, I would like
I'm going to stop it right here because Jim does a wonderful acknowledgement of yours truly, but I don't want to take your time now to listen to it. I hope you'll all tune in for podcast number 56. And as Susan Ferrante just said, if you're new to Jim's podcast, you can do what I did and start from the beginning and listen to all of them. I might do it again. So that's a wonderful suggestion. And Jim, thank you for the wonderful acknowledgement you give me in that podcast, but they can hear it if they go listen to it. And I just wanted to say that in this, my first podcast, I'll just play a little bit of it. I delivered what I called a living eulogy, a eulogy for somebody who's alive and kicking. So let's just listen to a little bit of that.
Welcome to the Art of Grateful Leadership podcast. I'm Judy Ellis, creator of the Center for Grateful Leadership and author of 3 books, including Grateful Leadership, Using the Power of Acknowledgement to Engage All Your People and Achieve Superior Results. I'm also Senior Vice President at the International Institute for Learning. I speak to you today with tremendous pride, but also with sincere sadness. As many of you already know from hearing last week's podcast in this incredible series, Jim Trella created and hosted it every Monday morning for the past 3 years. But he's stepping aside for now, given the challenges of his work and personal life at this time. What an amazing contribution this series has been. Jim brought his expertise as a PMP, MBA, MSIST, and legal program manager at General Motors, as well as his total resonance with all of the Grateful Leadership offerings, to make this literally one of the best podcast series I've ever heard. So today I want to begin to engage you in the conversation about where we want to take this podcast, how to keep it alive and thriving. And equally important, I'm here to deliver what I would call a eulogy, but thankfully it's for a very living, dynamic, and energetic person named James G.
So I hope you'll listen to that one in entirety too, because I told the whole history of how Jim and I met through his submitting an outrageous exercise in my Grateful Leadership On Demand course, and then his suggesting that he do a weekly podcast, and just wonderful, wonderful things that came out of it. And the real challenge I want to pose to each and every person here is it's our job to keep the podcast alive and thriving. And I welcome your ideas. And I was so delighted that the minute that he listened to Jim's last podcast, Jonathan McCoy stepped forward. And Jonathan is here with us today. And he said, how can I help in the transition? Jonathan's a project management professional and cross-enterprise project coordinator, Enterprise Project Management Solutions at Wells Fargo. And he had been in a keynote session last year that I delivered at North Carolina's PMI annual conference. And we had a very, very good connection there. So he is actually, I cornered him since he said, how can I help in the transition? I said, you could be my first podcast guest. And so we taped it, we recorded it earlier this week, and he just did a wonderful job of saying how this is part of his personal brand. And he was so happy to see it out in the world because it's still so rare, too rare. And how being in that presentation impacted his behavior after that. So you have to listen to next week's podcast, and you'll hear Jonathan. Jonathan, I'm sorry we don't have time to hear you speak, but we will in your wonderful podcast next week. So I hope you'll all congratulate and thank and appreciate Jim Trella. Jim, I think we'll keep your IIL email address. I think that's the easiest one. I think it's jim.trella@iil.com, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, it is.
And yeah, all right, we'll just keep that. And anybody who wants to thank him, and Jonathan McCoy, you talked about how his work impacted you. So I'm not that I'm leaning on you, but I'm requesting you to write him a heartfelt acknowledgement because I know Jim really treasures and appreciates that, as do we all. So thank you so much. And I want to take a few minutes now. I know we're running very close to the end, and we have all our wonderful contributors. I will just thank Harry Waldron. Wait, where is the acrostic? Roxy, I'm having a little trouble bringing up the next. Okay, yeah. Harry did an amazing acrostic on virtual grateful leadership. How timely, how responsive he always is to what's going on in the world and in our businesses, and it's just adorable. It's virtual grateful leadership. Please read that. And then Gratitude Connection, Donald Officer, The Courage to be a Grateful Leadership. He read a book called The Courage Map, and he interviewed the author, 13 Principles to living boldly. And it really is an excellent sounding book, and this will be posted very shortly also. And we also have Roxy Nevin with her lovely little column on grateful parenting. And some good news from quarantine. Oh, do we all need that? So these are wonderful contributions. And I just want to thank each and every person who contributes on a monthly basis. You are the foundation of this. You keep this whole initiative living and thriving and growing. And we welcome anyone's contribution. If they have a regular column they want to write, if they have a video series they want to do, we are so open as long as it really connects with grateful leadership and the power of acknowledgement. So feel free to write to me. Roxy, if you could just put my email address in the chat. I think most of you have it. But, okay, so two more things I want to do. I want to introduce you to Shana Serrano. Shana and I met when she was taking, wait, not quite ready for that one, Roxy. We'll close out with that. Thank you. Okay. Yes, Shana and I met when she was at the University of Maryland University College doing a graduate program in project management that Dr. Patricia Reif Beavers was teaching at the time. And Shana and I connected. Actually, she was in Iraq at the time and tuned in from my, every semester at UMUC, I would lead a webinar, and she connected from Iraq. She swears she was not in the tent. I thought she said she was, but she at 3 o'clock in the morning, she tuned in. And now she's doing something utterly amazing. Shana, just tell everybody she's in the U.S. Army now, and as a civilian, and she is also writing something very, very important. Shana, could you say a few words about that?
Yeah, so I definitely was not in a tent. They were little Italian villas, which sound way more romantic than they actually looked like. I'll try to find you a picture, and I'll send you a picture of those wonderful abodes.
Okay.
Yeah, so like Judy said, I've known her for about 13 years now, and despite the time zones, I decided to phone into that Power of Acknowledgement call that was at 3 a.m. Iraq time. And after that call, I decided to take her up on she recommended, she said, anybody who wants to reach out to me, I'd love to hear from you. And I was like, I don't really know much about this Power of Acknowledgement, but I'm going to send her an email because I really liked it. And we've been friends ever since. I do like the learning process. So now I'm working on my doctorate. And for my thesis, I decided what I wanted to do was I wanted to look at grateful leadership and measure its value in our evolving, globally connected world. I think that, it's worthy of the research. You don't find grateful leadership. You find gratitude in scholarly research, but you don't find so much about grateful leadership. So I thought that it would be a good opportunity to see if we could, Judy had mentioned she was interested in capturing the return on investment of Grateful Leadership Program or Grateful Leadership Training. And so I thought that I could work that into a dissertation, and that's what I'm doing. I think that okay, so there's a couple things. I've got some notes, but I'm kind of all over the place, so you'll have to excuse me as I try to catch myself back up to the couple things that I wanted to say. I wanted to briefly explain the difference. I'm actually working on a Doctor of Business Administration, which isn't the same as a PhD. Just because I think that the difference between the two is important for this research in particular. And so a PhD revolves around contributing new knowledge on a subject, where a Doctor of Business Administration focuses on answering a current problem. And that was part of the reason that I wanted to look at grateful leadership, because I think that as a solution to both employee engagement and employee retention, I think grateful leadership is a great tool for that. I could probably go a little longer, but I know we're super short on time, so I will cut it short and would love to carry this discussion offline if anybody's interested.
Shana, I really think we have to develop a forum for you, because I know how valuable the input from the members from the Center for Grateful Leadership would be. And I know Michelle Millette at Volvo has desperately been seeking to prove to Volvo that there is an ROI on it. We've been exploring different ways that she could do that. So maybe your work will be very helpful to her and to others who want. Angela Brown also, who's going for her certification level 1 right now. She would love to be able to demonstrate the ROI. So you're performing a very, very valuable function here. So I think we'll go, Roxy and I will put our heads together and figure out a way that we can give you a forum one way or another. So yeah, Angela just said she'd love to connect and learn more about Shana's work. That's awesome.
I think the only important thing to point out is this is probably about a year-long project. This dissertation is going to take probably till the end of the year to complete. And so with that time frame in mind, I'd love to be involved with whoever wants to be involved and help however I can help.
Okay, and why don't you, anyone who does want to help, send me an email and I'll forward everything to Shana. And yeah, I think yeah, Angela said it's taken me more than a year to get her certification in gear, but you're doing it. That's what counts. You made it happen. So anyway, this has been such an exciting, jam-packed session of the Center for Grateful Leadership, and I'm so grateful to each and every one of you who is carrying this work forward. And you know, I pass the torch to each and every one of you. We need that, and then you know, you're going to give that torch to others, especially if you're actually teaching this now, as some of you are, and it's so exciting. It gives me goosebumps, which is the true test, the goosebump test. So I wanted to officially end, and I'm happy to stay on as long as anybody wants, but I wanted to officially end with an adorable and reassuring video that Michelle Millet's fiance, Gabrielle Jimenez, put together, and I think it's so adorable and artful, and every time I watch it, I feel better. So we're going to end the session officially with this little video.
Friends, how are you? My name is Knight. I'd like to share with you a poem that I read today that I think would put everybody in a better mood, and hopefully will bring everyone to a different place of happiness and hope, and maybe even make you laugh. All right, here we go. The buildings were big, and people would smile, and travel they would mile by mile. But sick they became, in numbers they grew, businesses worried, communities too. Things stopped for a bit, the world slowed its roll, the virus had certainly taken its toll. But what they saw from slowing things down, in fact, they now had less reasons to frown. Families now gathered. What game shall we play? Pass the blue crayon, give mommy the gray. Dad's home, guys, he'll read us a book. Then all of us will get together and cook. The lungs of the planet caught a small break. Less travel meant less pollution to make. People did realize they'd all be okay. They don't need so much to get through the day. Maybe this virus that caused so much stress showed the world that more can mean less.
So I just love that, and Michelle, please thank Gabriel for us. And he was the puppeteer and the voice, and we see why he's your fiance. It makes great sense. So thank you all, and we're happy to stay around as long as anyone else wants to keep chatting. But officially, that is, I think, have I left anything out, Roxy? I think we have covered most, if not everything. Okay. And Betty and Michael, again, our thanks and great appreciation. This really got such a great flow of conversation going. I wish we could have gone on longer. So maybe, I don't know, maybe we should think of some other things that we can do with your message, with you and the Center for Grateful Leadership. We're open, as you know. Oh, Amy Smith got goosebumps from the video. Yes, that's beautiful. That's my test, and hopefully that's meaningful to you too. And Harry said, it's an awesome seminar. Have a great and grateful rest of the afternoon. I love that. I love that. That's just so beautiful. Yes, please let Gabriel know. I was hoping he was going to be here today, but you can play the recording back for him. I think are we still recording, Roxy? I think we are.